Okay, I know I said only a little while ago that I was finished with Twisted Metal for now, but then I suddenly got the idea for this video and found myself excited at the prospect. Like I said last time, I would only bring back Twisted Metal if I found something that interested me creatively. Well, one piece of trivia for every Twisted Metal character was just that. And just to be clear, I will be covering everyone that I consider an individual character in the series. To be an individual entry, you must first not be the same character in an ongoing continuity, and you must not be functionally identical to a previous iteration. So Marcus, Kane, and 2 and 3 don't get a separate entry because despite being very different characters, they are technically the same character, but then Sweet Tooth and Black and 2012 are functionally identical to their iterations in different continuities, therefore they don't get individual entries. I wouldn't have to specify this fact if the continuity wasn't a complete and total dumpster fire. Also, for the same reason as usual, I won't be including the TV show. That reason, of course, being I don't want to include any characters from that show until the show is definitively over. So let's get started roughly in order of appearance. Sweet Tooth was partially inspired by notorious sex offender and serial killer John Wayne Gacy. He was known as the Killer Clown due to his appearances as a party clown before his eventual conviction. So they took the idea of the Killer Clown and ran with it. Don't know where the flaming head comes from, though. Charlie Kane, in his original outing, was portrayed by an actor named Bob Goodins, who also portrayed the live-action version of Sweet Tooth in the first game as well. Father and son portrayed by the same person. How nice. According to series co-creator David Jaffe, during the filming of the live-action endings now referred to as the Lost Endings, the actor for Agent Stone didn't show up. So they ended up having to scramble, and Jaffe himself ended up portraying Agent Stone, which is why Agent Stone doesn't show up on camera and you only hear his voice.
God, you've got it. You've actually got the box.
Furthermore, it's why said voice is that of an American and not a British person like the ending says he is. What with Agent Stone ostensibly being a British secret agent. Commander Mason is a member of the Navy. How do I know this? Because Commander is not a standard rank in the US military. There are certain distinctions of existing ranks which have the word commander in them, like a captain can be described as a company commander or a lieutenant colonel being described as a battalion commander, but they're informal classifications. However, commander is a rank in the Navy. It's one of the highest ranks you can get, therefore Commander Mason is part of the Navy. They likely didn't intend him to be such, given that his design and vehicle very much scream regular military and not Navy commander. So it was probably a mistake, but what are you gonna do? Google wasn't around in 1994, and unless you were in the military or an enthusiast, you probably aren't gonna know the difference. The monster truck that Mike and Dave are driving in this game is a stolen vehicle. For some reason, in the very first game, Mr. Ash, aka Darkseid, has 2 separate special attacks depending on which version of the game you're playing. In the console version, it's a straightforward laser that does a bit of damage, however in the rare PC version, it also freezes your opponents. It's unknown why this change was made. Scott Campbell, the original driver of Spectre, shares a name with the game's director and series co-creator. The real-world Scott Campbell was unaware that the character was going to be named after him for a large chunk of the development. It's said that Captain Spears lost his platoon of 25 men in what was called the Jungle Wars of South America. While many games attempt to tie in real-world events with in-game events, such as Army of Two tying into 9/11, the war he fought is entirely fictional. This should come as no surprise to anyone, as the very first game in the series was set 10 years into the future from when the first game was released. And it's said that he lost his men 4.5 years before the events of the game.
What was that? 5 years ago?
4.5.
Meaning this hypothetical war was taking place more than 5 years after the point in which the game was released. Not a particularly obscure fact, but nonetheless important. Sergeant Carl Roberts, aka Buzz, is the canonical winner of the very first Twisted Metal game, or as canonical as you can get in a series like this, as his ending is the only ending directly referenced by another ending in Twisted Metal 2, when his sister saves him from the fate he found himself in his own ending. Angela Fortin is the only character from the original game where neither vehicle nor driver ever made another appearance in the series. They intended to have her in the sequel, but that was scrapped, and the dune buggy concept was reworked into Grasshopper. There were multiple attempts to bring the character back, such as in Small Brawl or the Harbor City game, but it was cut from the former and the latter was cancelled altogether. So as far as officially released games, never again. Though she did make a brief appearance in the first season of the TV show. Bruce Cochran, the original driver of the Thumper vehicle, was based on, played by, and apparently even conceptualized by a QA tester who worked on the game. What was that QA tester's name? Bruce Cochran. Art imitates life. If you count Captain Grimm and the 2012 iteration as the same character, Mr. Grimm is the only character in the entire series to be part of every single game's base roster. Not even Sweet Tooth could achieve that because he was of course unlockable in Twisted Metal 2, 3, and 4. Therefore, he was not part of the base roster. Minion has taken on many appearances through the series, usually being portrayed as a demon from hell, but the original concept for what would become Minion was very different. Originally, the APC final boss in the first game was going to be driven by a gang called Apocalypse 9. This, however, was scrapped in favor of the demon we know and love today. Despite being the younger sibling, Captain Jamie Roberts actually outranks her brother Carl, who's a sergeant, which in standard police rankings makes her 2 ranks his superior. Ken Masters in Twisted Metal shares a name with a character from the Street Fighter series. Since Street Fighter was a very big deal in the mid-90s and several members of Twisted Metal's development staff were noted as being fans, it's unlikely that this was a coincidence. And it was likely put in as a reference, although other than the name, these 2 characters share no similarities, regardless of what this incredibly horribly formatted trivia note on the wiki will tell you. Despite Amanda's helmet being discovered and put on display in a dinosaur museum after she goes back in time, when she's brought back to life in Twisted Metal Head-On, she still has her helmet.
Boy, I really hope somebody got fired for that blunder.
Despite the game obviously having a low budget, Krista Sparks, the driver of Grasshopper, was voiced by Tara Strong in Head-On.
You just wanted another contestant to help kill all those innocent people!
Simon Whittlebone's design in Twisted Metal 2 is possibly based on William Foster from the movie Falling Down, as they look strikingly similar. Meanwhile, his design in Head-On might be a reference to Milton Wadhams from the movie Office Space. Before settling on the name Marcus Kane, the character was originally referred to as John Doe, which was meant to play up the meta aspects of the character. He's so convinced that none of this is real, he doesn't even know who he was anymore. Of course, this would later be dropped for the name Marcus Kane to tie in with the Kane family, even though it took some 3 games to address the shared surname. They later reused the concept of a man named John Doe driving roadkill in Twisted Metal Black. At the age of 105, Captain Rogers is the oldest living mortal in the series. There are some immortal characters, such as Satan or the Grim Reaper, who are older than him, as well as a few reanimated corpses such as Mortimer, but Captain Rogers is the oldest person in the series who has the ability to die who hasn't yet died. In Twisted Metal 2, Mortimer's appearance bears a striking resemblance to that of a plague doctor. During the days of the bubonic plague, plague doctors were these people adorned in black robes and what looked like masks with a bird beak. Said beaks were filled with various herbs and substances thought to filter the air and keep them healthy. It's a natural bit of theming to base the character around on account of the fact that death is a main theme regarding the character of Mortimer. Axel being the primary subject of the Twisted Metal 2 cover art is the only time, and I mean only time in the history of Twisted Metal, that a character other than Sweet Tooth is featured as the primary subject of the game's cover art, which pays credence to the idea that they were building him up as the successor to Sweet Tooth as far as being the star of the series, something that probably would have come to fruition had Single Track continued to work on the series. Mike and Stu have the distinction of being the only characters in the entire series whose character bio is presented in the form of a poem. Granted, it's barely a poem, a rhyming couplet with a third line that doesn't connect to the rest of the poem. D-, guys. Twisted Metal has had a number of passwords in its history, acting as both level warps and cheat codes. However, if you enter the password left square 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 left in the Twisted Metal 3 password screen, seemingly nothing will happen. That is until you click on Flower Power's character bio, resulting in this alternate view of the driver Amber Rose. This was certainly a decision apparently made by software engineer Jim Buck. A little bit creepy, Jim, I'm not sure if I approve, but you do you. Despite having no physical similarities with the character in the show, and despite having no references to partying in his characterization other than the fact that he's a DJ, this character from Season 2, Episode 9 of the Twisted Metal TV show uses the name Club Kid. Damian Cole's entire presentation is very likely a reference to the band The Prodigy, between having a song called Firestarter and also featuring posters where the band's lead singer Keith Flint looks very similar to Damian. It seems they took some very keen influence from the band. Despite being the most Hollywood character in the game, Lance Wilder, the driver of Spectre and Twisted Metal 3, is actually from Dayton, Ohio. Buster Cobb, the driver of Augur, I believe is the only character in the entire series whose character profile is blatantly contradicted by their wish. His character profile implies he's mad at the tournament contestants for destroying the things he builds and wants to take them down. However, his wish is for the world to be able to see his inner child. Something I already counted as one of the worst endings in the series, but the fact it contradicts with his character profile only makes it worse. Even the character profile of Granny Dread sort of aligns with her wish. The idea she wants peace and quiet in her neighborhood, and her wish is to be able to stay home and watch her daytime TV. Or General Warthog wanting to lead the greatest army of all time, but that army ends up being the army inside a child's mind. At the age of 98, Granny Dread may not be the oldest competitor in the series, but she is, however, the oldest female competitor. While the manual states that Primeval has access to every special in the game akin to Minion from the very first game, this isn't actually true. Primeval has its own special and nothing more. This was likely an intended feature, but since Twisted Metal 3 was made in only 8 months, they probably didn't have time to implement this. It was likely such a last-minute decision that the manuals for the game were already being printed at the time they decided not to include it in the game. Or it might have been a miscommunication between the manual's designers and the developers.
Boy, I really hope somebody got fired for that blunder.
Pizza Boy discovered the Twisted Metal tournament after he was ordered to deliver pizzas to the tournament as part of a 1,000 hours of community service he accrued after shooting up a customer's bird bath for not giving him a good enough tip as part of a pizza-based extortion racket he was running. If none of that makes any sense to you, welcome to Twisted Metal 4. Despite not being mentioned in the game, Meter Maid's real name is Zenita Corbett. Not entirely sure if that's a reference to anything. Oh god. Well anyways, Dennis Petunia Flanders, aka Drag Queen, despite only speaking coherent words in the character menu, is voiced by none other than Ryan Drummond, most famous for being the voice of Sonic the Hedgehog from 1998 to 2004.
This Twisted Metal thing just ain't for me, girlfriend!
It's not actually the only Sonic-based trivia in Twisted Metal 4. Trashman is portrayed by none other than John St. John, the voice of Duke Nukem and the original voice of Big the Cat.
If you dookie, you nukie.
He voices Trashman as well as Rob Zombie and Melvin in this game. In fact, his Trashman is basically just his Big the Cat voice.
Me wish for plate of trash, whole world of garbage!
Which is notable because they both came out in North America in the same year, so it looks like John was getting extra mileage out of the same voice. Glad to see Calypso is playable in at least one game, therefore he can be included on this list. Since he's such a big character in the series lore, I'm gonna spoil you and give you 2 fun facts. While his backstory has been rebooted and retconned several times, the most well-known version of Mr. William Sparks got the nickname Calypso when he was working in an auto shop and was hammering in a rhythm very reminiscent of that genre of music. And second fun fact, in this exact same story, it's noted that Calypso got his magical powers from Satan himself. Despite many games in the series having a vehicle called Warthog with the driver being named something else, in this case the driver is named General Warthog, but his tank isn't called Warthog. His tank is actually called Trojan. This is not an obscure fact by any means, but I'll say it anyway. Since Dragula is his most famous song, Rob Zombie drives the Dragula in this game. The Dragula is a hot rod car from the 1960s TV show The Munsters, specifically the episode Hot Rod Herman. Rob Zombie is noted as having been a big fan of the Munsters growing up, hence that terrible Netflix movie he made, and being such a big fan he decided to make the Dragula part of his identity, and boy has he. Captain Grimm's pirate ship car is a retextured and slightly altered version of the Firestarter car from Twisted Metal 3. Despite being another James Bond-inspired secret agent character, Orbital's design was based off Harvey Dent, aka Two-Face of Batman fame. Goggle Eyes was the direct inspiration for the character of Vermin in Twisted Metal Season 2, to the point where many fans thought the character was Goggle Eyes before the name reveal, though the fact she drives the Roach Coach does muddy the issue a bit. Despite being a leprechaun, the game's manual misidentifies Microblast as being an elf.
Boy, I really hope somebody got fired for that blunder.
In what was the first, but for some reason not the last reference to the movie, the Joneses are a direct parody of the Griswolds from National Lampoon's Christmas Vacation. Like all other boss vehicles, beating Twisted Metal 4 as Crusher will result in the standard create a character ending, where you're supposed to fill in the blanks yourself. Though it is possible that Crusher was supposed to have a story, as it has a placeholder bio in the game files. A moon buggy is another word for a lunar roving vehicle. Because of the scale of the level where you fight RC Car, it's possible that the vehicle may actually be driven remotely by someone else, like an actual RC car. There's no way to know since you can't see in the windows, so there's no way to see if the car has a driver or not. Though being able to drive it in levels with a normal scale does muddy the issue a bit. Because of rushed production, Twisted Metal Black had to liberally reuse content. As such, certain characters show up in other characters' stories. In this case, the non-deformed version of Billy Ray Stillwell shows up in Preacher's final cutscene. Billy, or possibly someone who just looks like Billy, gets stabbed by Preacher. Preacher's real name is Jebediah, surprisingly not the first clinically insane In Agent Stone's ending, the cultist who ends up surviving and shooting Agent Stone dead is shot in the left eye by Agent Stone, which makes him visually resemble the Twisted Metal Black version of Calypso, implying that it was Calypso himself who shot Agent Stone as a means of personally twisting the wish. Kelly, the girl who died in Raven's story, is canonically Raven's girlfriend. This was implied when Raven referred to Kelly as her soulmate in one of her loading screens, and was later confirmed by game director David Jaffe, making Raven canonically lesbian or at least bisexual. So yes, the TV show did not make that up. The game manual of Twisted Metal Black is written as though it's a journal written by No-Face, otherwise known as Frank the Tank, and you can get an insight into his experiences in the insane asylum by reading his passages. Bloody Mary is named after a folkloric witch, demon, or ghost, depending on the interpretation. It's said that if you chant her name while looking into a mirror in a dimly lit room, she will appear covered in blood. And in fact, the Bloody Mary myth spun off from an even older myth wherein if a woman walked up a flight of stairs backwards, holding a candle and looking into a hand mirror, she will briefly see the face of the man she will eventually marry. Unless she's destined to die before marriage, in which case she will see the face of Death himself. Death, blood, marriage. Three themes extremely central to Bloody Mary, the Twisted Metal character, hence why her name is so thematically relevant. In the beta version of Twisted Metal Black, Dollface is a young girl forced into the mask by her father. However, in the final version of the game, she's a grown woman and it's actually her boss who puts her in the mask. However, in Twisted Metal Lost, it's noted that she was put into the mask while she was still growing, therefore the mask is giving her brain damage, implying that between Twisted Metal Black and Lost, they switched to the canon version of Dollface from the original to the beta. In the beta cutscenes, John Doe was referred to as Ed. The reason is a bit of a rabbit hole. It's a reference to Edward Norton's portrayal as neo-Nazi Derek Vineyard in American History X. It looks as though they were attempting to draw more parallels to that movie on account of the beta cutscenes featuring neo-Nazi imagery, as well as the gang of skinheads being actual skinheads instead of the non-specific apocalypse cult that they were in the main game. But all these ideas were scrapped, and the subject matter was toned down in the final game. Having joined the military to fight in Vietnam at the age of 18 in 1971, Mr. Grimm was born in 1953, and at the age of 51 at the beginning of the game, Mr. Grimm in Twisted Metal Black spent 33 years at Blackfield Insane Asylum. Charlie Kane's unnamed son is canonically on the autism spectrum. It's also implied that this is what makes him a mechanical savant. Cage, the driver of Warthog in Twisted Metal Black, is based off Marv from Sin City. Black was originally conceived as an overweight female BDSM-themed character referred to as Zipper Chick, who was originally supposed to drive Axel. This is the full character model. Fiddle-dee-dee. However, they later decided to give Axel the proper driver and retrofitted the Zipper Chick character model into the more serious character concept we know today. Depending on how you interpret Drag Queen, this might make Black the first canonically trans character in the series. The coded messages during Minions' loading screen in Twisted Metal Black were never actually intended to be canon. Apparently they were a last-minute addition in the hopes of giving Minions some sort of story. Warhawk is named after the game Warhawk, which is a game that many people who worked on Twisted Metal Black also worked on back when they all worked for Single Track. Alright, so for the next game, Small Brawl, every character is demonstrably different from their previous iterations, meaning they each get individual entries, and Small Brawl is somewhat of an obscure game, so instead of digging through the ditches myself, I decided to reach out to the game's lead designer, David Goodrich, to fill in some of the blanks. David, who by the way also worked on many other games including the Vigilante 8 games, the True Crime games, Twisted Metal Black Online, and Secret Agent Clank? Ugh. Well, nobody bats 1,000. If you want to check his work out, you can find him at Goodrich Games on YouTube. I'll put a link to that in the description. In a weird roundabout story, Warthog was originally 2 separate characters before it became Warthog. Originally, they wanted to include Pit Viper in the game, but they decided to rework the character into being Grasshopper instead. But they couldn't finish Grasshopper in time, so had to cut the character, and they repurposed the vehicle into being Warthog's vehicle. You see, they had the cutscenes for Warthog done and the vehicle for Grasshopper done, and decided to combine them as a Hail Mary to salvage one of the characters. In the duo of Bruce and Vinny, Vinny's design and mannerisms were inspired by Eminem, while the portrayal of Bruce was an amalgam of Fresh Prince, Kid and Play, and Michael Jordan, as they wanted the portrayal of Bruce to be a bit more positive than previous games. The version of Agent Stone in Twisted Metal Small Brawl, as well as the vehicle he drove, Crimson Fury, was almost cut from the game entirely, because the vehicle he drove was considered too similar to another vehicle in the game, Spectre. This is because they recycled Spectre's special for Crimson Fury, as well as Warthog, due to time restraints, just with a few different effects and parameters. Originally, he was meant to have a special attack similar to Dallas 13 from Vigilante 8, but this was scrapped due to, once again, time restraints. The file name for Hammerhead in the files of Twisted Metal Small Brawl is HH. That's awkward. The locket that Spectre received in his ending contains a picture of Ken Masters from Twisted Metal 2, with Spectre calling him father, before then driving the Twisted Metal 2 version of Spectre. Whether or not this is canon to Twisted Metal 2 is entirely up to your own interpretation. But either way, some version of Ken Masters is Spectre's father. In the cancelled spin-off to Small Brawl called Paint Brawl, Mr. Grimm was supposed to come back renamed to King Grimm, having conquered all the monsters in the Halloween dimension that he found himself in the end. While the design for Officer Roberts in Small Brawl has no noted inspiration, the voice of Officer Roberts was based off of actor Edward G. Robinson.
I've been saving this one for you, Billy Calypso!
The Small Brawl version of Sweet Tooth is canonically the cousin of another character in the game. Can you guess which one? You'd be surprised to find out it's actually Mime. Makes sense, they're keeping with the clown motif. This was supposed to be revealed in Mime's ending, although, say it with me, the ending was cut for time. Twister in Twisted Metal Small Brawl canonically has a sugar addiction. Slam, as he's named in this game, was renamed from Mr. Slam in previous games. The reason is because he was considered too young to be a Mr. It's notable that they didn't make this alteration for Mr. Grimm. The reason for that is because they quite literally forgot. In Twisted Metal Small Brawl, Mortimer canonically got his pet frog Golbur when he saved him from a science class dissection, which makes the fact that he then went on to do radiation experiments on him somewhat ironic. Axel's ending was fully finished and ready to go, but would end up being cut per a demand from Sony due to ableist language. Their words, not mine. Jimmy Ash, the driver of Darkseid in Twisted Metal Small Brawl, had not one but 2 separate cut endings that were conceptualized. One where he wishes to become the biggest bully in school, and then Billy Calypso turns him into Billy Calypso, and therefore he's the biggest bully in school. But then all of Billy's victims brutally beat Jimmy. And then the other ending is where he wishes to become the dark side of the moon. I do indeed see what you did there. While her character never made it into the game in any official capacity, the design of the character Mime was heavily based on Harley Quinn from Batman the Animated Series. While the character never appears in the game in any official capacity, the concept of Trapper as a character, a kid wearing a red mask with horns, was recycled from earlier versions of Jimmy Ash. Meanwhile, Jimmy Ash's concept as a pale kid in leather clothes was recycled from earlier versions of Spectre after they settled on the iconic bedsheet ghost look. The boss fight with Piecemeal was originally very different. It was originally supposed to be an amalgam of all the defeated cars from throughout the game. And instead of teleporting in and out whenever you defeated one of the other vehicles in the level, he was supposed to fall apart into the component cars and reform into Piecemeal whenever you defeated one of the component cars. which was similar but much more elaborate than what the final version ended up doing. A specific comparison was made to Devastator from Transformers. Unfortunate that this was cut for time because it sounded really cool. If you can believe it, Chucky Floop in Twisted Metal Head-On is the only person in the history of Twisted Metal to wish for money without any ulterior motives. The only other person in the entire series to wish for money was Angela in the first game, but her real intention was to get close to Calypso to kill him. The money was just a bonus, but money and nothing else? Chucky is surprisingly alone. Angel driving Thumper marks the only time in the series when Thumper wasn't being driven by some version of Bruce Cochran. The twist in Colonel Hall's wish, and therefore his death, is entirely down to a conflict of morality. He wants to hunt down drug dealers to save children, but hesitates to shoot when he finds members of a cartel who happen to be children, leading to his own death.
I want a tool that will help me eradicate villains of this world!
This is really only trivia because the ending is really poorly presented. Catfish has only 2 fingers on his right hand, the implication being that he only needs 2 fingers to pull a trigger. Despite her sister Amanda being noted as being from Indiana because Indy 500, which was meant to tie in with Amanda's love for speed, Miranda, strangely enough, is noted as being from California. Agent Shepard enters the tournament under the pseudonym Mr. Smith. Contrary to what one may think, this is actually not a reference to the movie Mr. and Mrs. Smith, as Twisted Metal Head-On predates that movie by a couple of months. It's more likely being a reference to the surname Smith being a common, almost stereotypical fake surname in many movies and TV shows, to the point where it has an entire page on TV tropes dedicated to it. And now I have to give myself a full-body bleach bath for going on TV tropes. Gene Ruddish has the distinction of having the vehicle with the lowest health in the entire series. In the PS2 version of Head-On, his vehicle, ATV, has a whopping 50 armor. To put that in perspective, Twister and Mr. Grimm are usually fighting for last place, and their armor stats both vary between 85 and 95 from game to game, meaning that ATV has almost half the armor of the character with the next lowest health. Though in the PSP version he has 85 armor, which is much more reasonable. Cousin Eddie is named and somewhat based off Cousin Eddie from the National Lampoon Vacation series, a character who's appeared 4 times in the series, all portrayed by the same actor, Randy Quaid. And the RV that Cousin Eddie drives is based off the RV from National Lampoon's Christmas Vacation. Despite Twisted Metal Lost being levels from the cancelled Harbor City retrofitted into a 4-level bonus game, Severed Sam, the driver of 12-Pack, was never in Harbor City. He is a wholly original character made specifically for Twisted Metal Lost. Dollface in Twisted Metal 2012 is named Krista Sparks, the same name given to the driver of Grasshopper in the earlier games. However, unlike the earlier games, this version of Krista Sparks has no relation to Calypso. None that we know of, anyway. Mr. Grimm's face paint is meant to invoke 2 separate things. First of all, it's supposed to invoke the skull motif of Mr. Grimm from the previous games on account of the fact that this version is very much alive. But it's also supposed to invoke voodoo imagery on account of the fact that during voodoo rituals, practitioners were known to sometimes paint their faces. Despite being a righteous person who's close to God, it's never actually specified if Preacher is an ordained minister in this or any of his other iterations. In most cases, he's considered nothing more than a passionate evangelist who works to spread the word of God. And that's everyone that I count. Sorry, Charlie. Now, I would like to take this idea and apply it to other franchises that I like, but the reason why I started with Twisted Metal was because it's easy to differentiate characters as being worthy of being included. Are you an identifiable character that drives a vehicle in the games, or are you otherwise playable? There you go, you belong on the list. Meanwhile, applying this to other franchises is a bit more difficult because you need to put a qualifier to know who's worthy and who's not worthy of being included. So let me know if you'd like to see this style of video apply to a different franchise and what qualifier you'd like to put in. Should I go game by game in GTA identifying a piece of trivia about every character, or just stick to, say, the main characters of every game? Let me know, because at this point I honestly don't know what my audience wants me to make. That's all I've got. If you like this video and want to support the channel, you can leave a like, comment telling me what you think, subscribe, and hit the notification icon so you're always up to date on what I'm doing. I've been the King of Snark Style right here on Tactical Bacon Productions, and I will see you next time. Stay crispy, my friends.